they are not forced to invest in their profit, they're not forced to invest their profit into their education. Now, why are we debating this nowadays, ladies and gentlemen? We're debating this because as the useful buying institutions are vastly increasing in number worldwide. However, they lack in providing a decent education worthy of high fees charged to students. As a proposition, we'll prove two main things in order to win this debate. The first one, that this fails to prepare students for society's demands. The second one, that they take advantage of vulnerable groups which compose the majority of the student population. Now, on our side, we present a three-step model in order to explain how this will be carried out. In the first step, we will legally prohibit the subordinated education of universities as business. This accounts for the removal of as or brand names, and also removal of state recognition of the diplomas or credits earned by these people entering these institutions after this motion has been applied. In the second step, we will also remove all the governmental financial aid received both by the businesses and its attendees. In the third step, we will allow them to switch their legal status to a non-for-profit or to sell their facilities to the state and the young public. On our side of the house, we present three main arguments in order to prove our constructive case. The first one is called effort-free education, the second one is called fast-food education, and the third one is called free-falling into failure. Now, I would like to start with my first argument called effort-free education. Let's analyze the main stakeholders in this institution. On one side, we have the students who want a good and affordable education to grant their job prospects and social mobility. While on the other hand, we have the administrations and the owners who want to maximize their profit by recruiting more and more people and reducing the cost. We see how both of these sides have huge conflicts of interest and therefore create a moral hazard which only hurts the students. Let's see why it isn't possible that these institutions have a profit incentive. Two main reasons. The first reason is no investment. We see how having this profit incentive in mind makes them more likely to focus on short-term gains rather than long-term investment in education. So to do this, they cut costs drastically in crucial areas and increase their fees from the students. Consequently, we see how many institutions will invest only 4% of their budget into the well-being of this education. We also see that this 4% of the investment is only being invested in enlarging the classroom in order to fit more students and increase the space, therefore increase the enrollment rate and the profits. We also see how for the same level of education, most for-profit charge even 3 times more than these non-for-profit, and therefore we see how this is outrageous and isn't positive for the education that they are being given. Now, why should we ban them? So having this profit incentive in mind, this profit gives them, it's given by these enrollment fees. So once these people enroll into these institutions, they pay little to no attention to their students. And this is exclusive for the universities, ladies and gentlemen. See, non-for-profit universities do have an incentive to invest in order and care beyond enrollment because their profits come from the quality of the education from these institutions. So these institutions have firstly no incentive to provide good education, and secondly, no incentive to reinvest whatsoever. And the second argument, the nature of the service itself is already counterproductive. So education is a complex service to assess before finished. It's easy to assess after having finished education. So in these institutions, there's a gap of information between the students who don't know what they're buying into, and this is taken as an advantage from these same private universities to carry out an extensive marketing campaign in order to increase their enrollment. Now, why do they do this? The first reason is marketing is cheaper than investing in education, and secondly, this is the best way to increase their enrollment rate and therefore their profit. So we see the consequence, they spend ridiculous amounts of money in recruiters, and even in some cases, they hire 2.5 recruiters for all member staff. Ladies and gentlemen, the member staff are actually ones responsible for taking care of the education and providing good education to the students. Now, this leads to them, firstly, lying about their cost problems, and this is at the end of the law, it is not permissible, and secondly, they could even falsify the graduation rates or their job prospect statistics. Thirdly, they are using native skills ads, which are illegal, to lure students have been recently discharged from the army, which again is illegal and is further enrolled. The first is the United States about inexistent law options for America. And even the big reason they are doing fear and pain as tactics to lure the students in, which are struggling with financial and personal issues. We see how this is incentive for these institutions in order to give and enroll more people. Therefore, these are things that should be regulated, and if they are regulated, these institutions immediately close, as we will be explained by the second speaker. So in this argument, we will have this objective stash, and therefore are able to and to hide this illegal describing the pains. And the second argument, yes?
The problem is the use of illegal marketing campaigns. Why can't we regulate these
I
businesses
understand your point.
so that you don't have
I understand your point. There's two main answers for this. Firstly, regulations have already taken place in the United States and in India and many examples worldwide, and they have, however, not worked. In the second case, we do regulate them properly as they close to these marketing campaigns are intrinsically what gives them their profit and what makes them function. So we see how that point falls for our side. And the second argument, fast food education, we prove how they don't deliver proper education and therefore constitute our harm to society. Two layers of analysis for you, enter degrees and harm to society. The first layer of analysis, we saw these profit incentives makes them have a poor educational standard. These students are in crippling debt and a situation that forces them to take a job in order to pay for this high fees charged by this institution, plus already sustaining their financial situation, which decreases the quality of their education and therefore increases the dropout of these students. They claim to qualify workers in less time, but this is not true, ladies and gentlemen. If it were true, all universities would be doing this. And only 22% of the people performing a bachelor's degree actually graduate. Ladies and gentlemen, this is 3 times less than in non-profit universities. Now, even if they do graduate, employers know that they have a bad quality, so they prefer to hire somebody in a lower level of education than which come from non-profit than from these students from for-profit universities. Only 72% of programs created by the for-profit universities make less money after they're done than high school dropouts, and this is said by the Secretary of Education of the United States. So even if they do get a job, let's assume that, which is a great concession, they can even cope with the long-term debt, which is $1,000, so therefore the worse than how they started, so the stance that so many issues rather than none is actually flawed. And the second layer of analysis, let's analyze the detriments to society. The problem is when they create unqualified professional workers. Yet, despite of them teaching to many people, they have no actual benefits for the students or to the society. And they are detrimental in all areas. Let's analyze the spectrum of these effects. On one side, we have an accountant which can fail to provide the service to their employer or to the employee. But not is taken to a greater extent, which we have doctors and engineers who destroy lives when we have that complete education from these for-profit universities. So on our side of the house, we argue that we must prevent these unprepared workers from causing these atrocities, and therefore, so even if some universities are historically possible, the prevention of these consequences outweigh the potential benefits of losing all of them. Therefore, on our side of the house, we stand by the phrase that university should serve their students first, not their shareholders.
For-profit universities would result in the closure of over 3,200 for-profit institutions and leave 2.4 million students disenfranchised in the United States alone. We don't ban things slightly. We only ban things that are inherently and irredeemably harmful. We accept that there are some problematic schools, but this is a problem that can be fixed with regulation. We don't think for-profit schools are inherently or structurally bad. A regulatory framework already exists for the universities, and we propose to make this framework more robust to curb the worst-case situations on competition side. For instance, we have restrictions on advertising in terms of how much companies can spend on it, the claims that can be made about job applicant graduates to prevent deceptive marketing and lies. We also have minimum education standards, and we're able to suspend access to funds, such as federal loans, and we can shut down delinquent for-profits. We also support class action lawsuits against unscrupulous schools and debt forgiveness for students if their schools are about to be built. For instance, recently, under the Obama administration, they pardoned the debt of over 3,500 students after verifying colleges used to abuse of fraud. This debate happens globally, and in many parts of the world, such as Malaysia, India, Serbia, and the Philippines, these institutions are among the most competitive academic environments. We think opposition have been able to engage with most of the world that have only been exclusively targeting the US. We will engage that as well. Thank you. I have 3 arguments to you in my speech today. Why this is a legitimate and informed choice, why market incentives ensure the quality of education, and why this makes education accessible to specific groups who would otherwise be systematically disadvantaged. My second speaker will tell you about the unique academic contribution of these institutions, as well as how they add economic value to having high standards. Firstly, some responses. They give you 3 main arguments. How there's a conflict of interest between shareholders and students that leads to lower quality education, how there's an information asymmetry, how there's social harms due to dropouts and bad quality education. All of these models will be integrated into my argument, but not put education well first. They told you falsely that regulations have failed. We think this is a blatant untruth. We think in many institutions, such as all across the developing world in India, Malaysia, and even on their grounds in the US, these regulations have succeeded in taking down universities that are deceptive marketing. We succeeded in cutting off access to federal loans, and before we could take down a whole for-profit institution in terms of colleges. Thank you. Moving on to my first argument, why this is a legitimate choice. This will directly clash with their argument about deceptive marketing and information asymmetry. Firstly, they already account for deceptive marketing and lies in our regulatory framework, but we're going to engage with their other arguments on the emotions and the inability to make rational choice. We think there are a few reasons why you can make a legitimate choice. We agree that they cross-border, there's a cost burden on these people going to universities, but this cost burden is exactly what will create critical thought for these people. We think that going into these universities is not a simple choice, and there are implications that force people to think about their problems. People who are capable of weighing up the choices, and opposition never really gives analysis about why they're unable to make this decision because of all the information they have. Furthermore, there's easily accessible information for them to weigh up the cost and benefit. For instance, in the United States, you have WSDC.com, and in Malaysia, you have Seatera rankings that provide easily accessible rankings and evaluations at your fingertips. Just a 10-second Google search away with them that gives you all the information required to weigh up the cost and benefits of each choice. They never told you why people are unable to do that. But we recognize that there is a risk. We think going to college is a risk in and of itself, but we think risks are okay to take as long as there's an informed choice involved. They've only told you there are risks, not explaining what there's valuable information. In the US, for instance, only 38% of African Americans who enroll in college are able to graduate in 6 years. If their sole criteria is the fact that there is risk, then they would ban these people too. But we don't think they're okay with that because we think as long as you have informed consent about this, you're able to mitigate that, take into account your own cost and benefits and make the decision. So then, we think there's also legitimate benefits they're able to weigh up. The goal is often to expand your opportunities by going to these colleges, by accessing greater jobs at higher pay. Something this is simply not possible without a degree. But even entry-level requirements in the US now require degrees. But let's take down this only argument again about emotions. We agree that they may target emotional pressure from them to go to school. But thank you. But they never told us why just create emotional marketing. They're unable to take over rational decision. We think that the barrier being bombarded by ads will thank you by multiple thousands of institutions. The only way for you to differentiate these institutions is to go further in and research in easily accessible info like WSDC.com or Seatera and Malaysia. Therefore, we think people are able to make legitimate informed choice, and the emotional marketing is not enough to override the decision-making documents. Before I move on, yes.
Are you aware of these universities have such low educational standards that many times they are not even in these rankings?
We think if they fail to adhere to minimum education standards, our regulatory reform allows them to become optional to federal loans and take it down. We think there are minimum education standards for you to even operate as a university. We think that's fundamentally untrue. Second argument, why market incentives ensure quality of education. This is a direct clash with their idea that there's a conflict because of the conflict of profit. We think the profit incentive actually creates better education systems for that. For most students, good outcomes mean better job prospects. And that is the product that these institutions are selling. We think they are generally abusive. Why is this so? For several reasons. Fundamentally, we make money by increasing the revenue. In order to do this, we need to produce reasonable outcomes. Otherwise, people wouldn't be able otherwise. Therefore, you have a reasonable standard of education that people can easily have faith in, that if they push through it, they have no trauma. So fundamentally, it's highly competitive. In the US alone, there are 3,000 institutions. And there are 3,000 institutions competing for a limited market. You must provide quality education to remain competitive and have its edge. Plus, we think even if engineering environments are lower, as they say, these institutions still care about their brand value. They want their degree to have some value and not to be students' worthless. This is why successful students and successful job business are important for them to market themselves. Thus, we use strategies such as building connections between students and potential employers. We give you the case study of Mutual Petroleum in Malaysia, which connects them with the petroleum company and provides employer for the future. The only thing they give us, the only thing they talk about is that there's a short-term incentive. We don't think so. We think when you build a for-profit university, there's a huge sunk cost that you need to recover that's only possible in the long run. This sunk cost is only recoverable as a month's profit when you're able to make these reasonable job outcomes with that you and entice students to join the university. That's why this makes education accessible to those who are otherwise systematically disadvantaged. We need to recognize there's simply not enough space in integrated colleges. In the United States, for instance, only 12% of students who currently study in for-profit institutions have the same opportunities in community colleges. This debate is not comparative between for-profits and communities. It's comparative between going to a for-profit or not getting an education at all. No thank you. Why is this so? Who are these people who go to for-profits? We think that they do two wrong categories. One, they're unable to meet these entry requirements within community colleges. One, they may be away from the education framework for a long time. For instance, veterans, people who have to speak their secondary school education. These people tend to be older and are unable to meet the stringent requirements that are often necessary in community colleges. However, this does not mean they are unable to do coursework, and for-profits only have an incentive to cater to these people and have them compulsion to graduate anyway, so that they can do it. Furthermore, the flexible study schedule many people need because of that. For instance, if they have childcare or have to work part-time, this can only be catered to for colleges. These people also generally come from ethnic minorities, women, and the poor because they're unable to access the same opportunities to go to colleges. Also, comparative on their side. When you deny them access to these colleges, they're unable to get degrees because of structural reasons that the lack of flexibility and inability to provide. They're shut out of most skill jobs and their long-term employability decreases when they're unable to develop deeper core skills. For instance, those in general field that develop in university, for example, doing better at writing applications for speaking, that they do much more. Their policy provides whole classes of people opportunities, and so policy that entrenches inequality in these guys for protecting people. Ladies and gentlemen, for-profits can provide quality education. People are able to make informed choices and weigh through this, and just because there's a risk doesn't mean you can have a choice. It's unjust to shut down the system that enfranchises people. We stand behind for-profits.
The first position speakers were 1 minute and 15 seconds.
I thank the first opposition speaker for their speech. And now, to continue the case for proposition, we call one Mr. Francisco Caniche.
To go to one of these universities, all you need to do is to take a small loan of $1 million and hope to learn something whatsoever. I'll begin my speech by reviewing some points presented by team opposition and then I'll present our third argument, free falling to failure. I'll divide my presentation into 3 main points. The first about regulation, the second about information, and the third about marketing. Beginning with regulations, team opposition told you that there's no reason why not regulate illegal marketing instead of just banning all of these universities. What we tell you is that these illegal marketing schemes that these universities are using are already illegal. They are already regulated. The problem is that these universities are still using them, to attract their students. And this is their only way to stay afloat. That is why they're using them, because if they don't, they just disappear. They cannot operate without this illegal, abusive, and coercive market. Otherwise, they just cannot lure students in, because they cannot have their actual quality of education, and they cannot misguide their students. So if you were to impose these incredibly strict regulations in which they were incredibly harsh on these universities using marketing, they would actually close down. We have the example of the United States, where this actually happened. They imposed very tough regulations to these colleges, and that had the effect of closing down the great majority of the institutions in the country. But the problem is that closing back is a much more effective approach than these regulations that will have the same effect. Why? Because of two reasons. First, because it's much easier to enforce, and it takes much less resources. Second, it's much more effective in actually reducing these harms to society. And third, the funds that you would spend on all these regulations can actually go to good education, good public education for the states to promote. On a second point of regulation, about the information, Timo Opposition told you that we are only targeting the US. We're only talking about the United States. This is not the case. These same problems, these problems that we talk about and that we explain for our arguments, happen in countries such as Germany, Japan, Poland, Peru, Malaysia. Yes, Malaysia, the same country that they brought their example about. Let us talk about Malaysia. Doctors from for-profit universities in Malaysia earn a starting salary of $700 on average, right? And their debt is on average $70,000. That is 100 times more than their starting salary, ladies and gentlemen. And these loans are actually private loans, which have staggering interest rates and that they cannot pay. So clearly, this is not a good example of for-profit education working well. They told us that they can make a choice, that students can make a choice with information, and they can go in knowing what they're going into. What we feel is that they don't have informed consent. They can't make this informed choice. Why? Because these universities are using deceptive marketing to trick them into going into these universities and trying to hide their actual stance of education. And they talk about these rankings. Actually, these colleges, in the great majority of cases, do not appear in any rankings whatsoever. The University of Phoenix, perhaps the biggest university, for-profit university in the United States, does not appear in the U.S. News World Report. Sir. Now, according to my representation for marketing, they told us that there is no problem with marketing appealing too much. What we tell you is that, of course, there is no problem. There are problems when these universities are targeting the most vulnerable groups in society and using their pain and their desperation to lure them in against their own interests and to try to attract them to these colleges, which will only be counterproductive for their future. And yes, they are even worse than having no education whatsoever, because they come out with useless degrees. In the majority of the cases, they don't even graduate. There's only 20% graduation rate, which is a third of any of the average community colleges. And they are having useless degrees, and they're having staggering debt, which undermines their career. Timo Opposition told me that you have to have good education as a for-profit to be able to remain competitive. This is not the case. You know what's the way of remaining very competitive as a for-profit? Having these market campaigns which are abusing their students. Because these, ladies and gentlemen, are trust markets. Universities are trust markets. What does that mean? It means that for these students to go in, they need to trust the institution they're going into. Why? Because they don't know exactly what they're planning into. They cannot assess the quality of the education they're receiving as they receive it. They can only assess it many years later when it's too late to go back. And therefore, these students need to be able to trust these universities, and they cannot trust these for-profit universities which only care about making profits. In the case of non-profits, on the other hand, their interests are aligned. Both the university and the students want to provide the best education possible, therefore they can trust. Finally, Timo Opposition told us that for-profits give the same quality of education as the university. This is factually incorrect. It is wrong. We tell you that 78% of for-profit colleges, their average graduate earns less than a high school dropout. This is actually a stat of the Ministry of Education in the United States who takes so much stock from. Why? Because these employers see these institutions as completely counterproductive for these students and as an incredibly bad choice for the job market. And this is worse than no education whatsoever. They get a third of the graduation rates of non-profits. And in the case of non-profits, even if they were the same, which is not the case, even if community colleges were providing the same education as for-profits, community colleges are charging significantly less for the same quality of education. Therefore, it is still a much better deal. Now, begin with our argument. 3.2 do you disagree?
Non-profit colleges provide specific flexibility they require?
I understand, sir. Well, first of all, this flexibility is not so great because they are allowing the students to choose the majority of their classes, but they don't have the information to choose them. If you were allowed to choose whatever you wanted, you would probably choose the classes that you like better, not ones that would help you in the future. And under your stand, which is regulating so much, you're losing all those supposed benefits they're talking about. Because if you want to impose so many regulations, the flexibility goes completely away, therefore it is non-existent. Now, our third argument, we're going to will prove that for-profit universities use fraudulent schemes and therefore should be banned. We'll divide this into two areas of analysis. The first about the impact on individuals, and the second about defaulting universities. Beginning with the impact on individuals. Now, too often, the money students get from loans is the main source of revenue for these projects. They are designed to exploit their students' financing for personal gain. In the United States, for-profit receive 90% of their revenue from government student loans. And these colleges completely disregard the financial situation of their students. They only care about profits. Instead, for-profit college enrollment represents less than 15% of all enrollment in the United States, yet more than 50% of all student loan defaults. And in developing countries, this is even worse because as there aren't any government program, these students have to take loans from private banks, which charge them incredibly high interest rates. On secondary analysis about defaulting universities, we see that these colleges are incredibly fraudulent. Why? Because they can only work with few regulations or operate independently. Otherwise, they just don't work and they don't their profits and they close down. We see the example of Obama regulations, which is so much talked about, holding colleges accountable for their student success in the workforce, had the effect of closing down the great majority of for-profits in the country and nearly all large corporations. This shows that these colleges are incompatible with proper regulation. They have to operate fraudulently and they should be banned. Also, in many cases, these universities have used legal loopholes that are not necessarily illegal but in the edge to scam their students and take their money. This is the example of Peru, where 17 for-profit colleges opened and closed within 3 years, leaving their students unprotected and making their owners rich. And they completely tricked their students into believing they would get an education when they actually weren't, as is very common with these for-profit colleges. So in this survey, I put to you that the profit incentive makes it a good idea to exploit students' finance personal gain, a problem that is aggravated by the special vulnerability of these students. Such a system should be banned. All these reasons we believe that universities should serve their students first, not their shareholders. Thank you.
Second proposition, speakers ban 8 minutes and 17 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, in my speech I'm going to be arguing why for-profit colleges for a lot of times are of course for good. They give good quality education and they target individuals who provide education to people who need it most. But before that, I want to respond to a few things from the previous side. First, on this entire idea that regulations don't work. First, when they said that the Obama administration has been able to successfully close down a lot of colleges, they themselves are proving that our regulations do work. But second, we think that the reason why these regulations won't work is because we regulate too much, these businesses won't survive. We think that there are a lot of for-profit colleges that survive even while following these regulations. We point to the example of Taylor's University in Malaysia, for instance, which has been ranked one of the greatest colleges within Malaysia, and it is a for-profit institution and still follows all these rules. Or NIIT and Manipal in India, which have been successful businesses that follow all the regulations and were not shut down by the government. So we think it is possible for institutions or for-profit colleges to follow all the regulations, not use deceptive marketing, and yet continue to exist to become profitable. No, thank you. But secondly, we say, even if regulation doesn't always work, this is not a justification to prove why we should ban a certain industry. For instance, in the mining industry, a lot of times some businesses violate regulations and illegal practices, but we don't ban the mining industry altogether because we recognize it's unfair to punish businesses who follow laws that don't because of other businesses that don't. So we think on regulations that they do work, but even if they sometimes don't work, it's still unjustified ban. Secondly, we have to ask the question, are students better off? Because they give us three reasons as why for-profit colleges are bad. First, on this entire idea of high dropout rates. They say a lot of times their dropout rates in for-profit colleges are high. First is a lot of usually untrue. Dropout rates in community colleges, this is an alternative that they have, are usually higher than dropout rates in for-profit universities that have 2-year courses. But secondly, I think the reason for high dropout rates isn't because of the college themselves, but because of the demographic they cater to. It is far more likely for African Americans or Hispanics to drop out of college because they have other things to take into account versus these individuals. That's not the fault of these schools, and if they were in a community college, the dropout rates would have been the same thing. But lastly, even if dropout rates are higher, we think it's a perfectly legitimate risk for people to take. And if you drop out, it's probably because you found that the college is not for you, and there are better alternatives for you to make money. We don't think it's necessary, or we don't think a bad thing. And a lot of times, just because some individuals drop out within the system doesn't mean to justify a ban for everyone else who benefited and were able to graduate and get the degree. So we don't think that the standard is fair. Secondly, don't think they see that debts exist and the huge levels of debt for for-profit universities. First response is that debt exists also for non-profit universities, and you still have to commit to that to pay your profit, to pay your tuition. But secondly, the reason why debts are more acceptable in for-profit universities is because of the flexibility they're able to provide. And because you're able to have a part-time job while also being able to have, you're going to college, means that the extra income you get from that part-time job will help you pay for the for-profit university's tuition, even if it's more expensive, and to allow to balance the cost. But lastly, we think that just because you have debt doesn't mean it's inherently bad. That allows individuals to uplift themselves. A parallel example of this is in the poor, for instance, take debts to start their own micro enterprise. The state is perfectly fine that, even if they fail, because we recognize that we should allow them the potential to succeed and give them opportunities to their point. So we don't think that's inherently a bad thing. But lastly, they said it's bad for education because for-profit universities only spend on marketing. They told me that for-profit universities have to spend education on their students because if they don't, they won't get the quality that they need to be able to produce their job outcomes. But secondly, non-profit universities usually spend a lot of their resources on things like research, but don't necessarily help the students' interests. We think that for-profit universities don't have to do that, and that's why it's better on their side house, we're still able to balance the spending. Before I move on to my arguments,
because we don't have to do that non-profits are perfect, and also again, research is a good education for the students in these
we think that for some individuals, research might be good, but for someone who goes to college just to get a job, the ability for you to research different things isn't as important for you. Now let's ask the question, will students be better off? Because we told you the benefits of college education. It might not make you a CEO of a company, but at least you're able to get a job interview because you have a college diploma to show for, or because you have the specific skill sets that you're able to properly analyze numbers, for instance, allows you to progress in the future. These are giving opportunities, don't think that they rely on their resumes. Let's move on to my argument. No thank you. So I provide a specific no thank you. Educational needs only for for-profit colleges can provide. Recognize that for-profits provide a greater sense of flexible education because things like for-profit online courses or night classes like in NIIT in India. Why is this so? Because of a large portion of the demographic is part of the working class or single individuals who have to balance both their work and their school, so the market for incentive for these corporations is to cater to the class and give the class a need to save profit for every student to be able to enroll. On converse, non-profits are less flexible because you don't have the demographic, they already have a majority of the demographic to people who come straight out of high school and don't necessarily have to work for them to go to good classes. But secondly, it's the Lunga initiative in that it's very hard for them to change schedules. Why is flexibility important? A lot of individuals just don't have the luxury of time to spend a full day or a regular day of school in these colleges. If you're a single mother, for instance, who wants to work to provide for your family, you need to be able to get anyone to get a degree to uplift yourself and get better job opportunities. Under your house, you won't be able to do so because you won't have enough time to enter these colleges and be able to work at the same time going to these colleges. But on our side, our world, we're able to do both of these things because you can work in a regular day and work, like take classes at night or take online courses that allow you to be able to live yourself. So comparative for people who are most vulnerable in society and who are marginalized by the system of non-profit colleges, for-profit colleges give you that active incentive to protect them and give them access to education. Their side entrenches inequality and disproportionate effects of poor, we think that's unjust. But secondly, how for-profits provide an economic value that may have high standards. Recognize that the incentive to create niche courses exists in for-profit education because they have a market incentive to make sure their students have jobs in the future. This usually means at the top that we have jobs or courses that cater to the market demand. Things like technical vocational skills, for instance, accounting, things like engineering, for instance, or science courses that have high job outcomes. Why is it different from their side? We think non-profit universities are less likely to be more flexible in changing the courses because they have to cater to things like your teachers and donor bases that aren't as accepting to change. An example of this, for instance, would be Manipal in India, where they give the majority of the doctors degrees and allow people to get employed overseas because of the doctor degrees. They provide, or the Philippines have nursing colleges. They're able to provide nursing education to make sure they're able to export the labor of nursing overseas. But secondly, we think that a lot of times the developing world doesn't have access to the kind of capital needed to provide for these educational systems. The developing world a lot of times sees not enough money or lack of budget and lots of red tape. In comparison, the development, even in the developed world, we think there's cuts in budgets for community colleges and all that. In comparison, for-profit universities, given that they have huge levels of capital and actually multinational corporations, are able to develop shared market space and be able to invest in education where they otherwise wouldn't have been able to have education. We don't only provide quality education, we make sure everyone has the right to be able to access that education. For-profit universities do that. We think it's important, and we're very proud of those. Thank you.
Second motion goes back, making it and 47.
I think the second opposition speaker for this speech. And now to continue with the opposition, please welcome Ms. Serena Montoya.
What is at stake is the education of individuals and not the self-control. Because from this they can help promote you that for-profit universities and colleges fail to provide students for society students and take advantage of vulnerable groups which comprise the majority of their student population, who are still proud to propose solution to these also ban for-profit universities and colleges. I will begin my speech in three fundamental points of introduction: the for-profit model, to ban or to regulate, and vulnerable. The first point of convention for today is the for-profit model, to examine whether for-profit colleges are inherently negative. From their side of the house, we have heard that we should only ban things that are inherently negative for our society. Ladies and gentlemen, this is basically why ban for-profit colleges. We have pointed to you in our three arguments why this zero investment, a point which they have not touched in this story to date. So also heard from them that going to college is a risk in itself, and therefore this is not in order for universities. Two main answers for this. First of all, they're basically conceding to our point that universities are trust markets, and that therefore there is a gap of information that the students are not getting, and that therefore uninformed and vulnerable. Second answer, we see that this university is far riskier to attend them than to attend non-profit universities. For a fact, this is working the situation. It also told us that it does require degrees, and this is why it is necessary for us universities to exist in society. Three main answers. First of all, we see that the students that attend these universities are not even getting this degree stage. Therefore, they aren't even getting any jobs. And a second answer, we see that they are clearly not well educated enough to be able to succeed in a changing job market, because they have said it themselves. Education is flexible and it asks for different jobs. Therefore, they do not have the capacity to compete in the job market with the education that these universities provide. It also told us that for-profit universities actually create a better education because these universities don't have a written standard for individual quality. Two main answers for it. First of all, we clearly see how there is no incentive for them to be good at education, but only to be good at selling themselves. This is precisely why they actually invest more in advertising than invest in their institutions and their professionals. If they had an incentive to invest for education, they would actually be investing in it. They have also told us that if universities actually care about the world life. Well, in many cases, we actually see that this is not the case, because they just care about making profits and therefore scamming their students as a percentage to the exam of the group, which we have not answered. We have also heard that these universities have a better model because they actually allow students to work while they study. Three main answers for it. Suppose that this flexibility is actually a bad excuse for providing less classes and therefore a bad education. Answer. So the students are actually forced to work in order to provide, which in turn leads to more trouble rates, and then not getting an education in the slightest. For answer, if you were to rate it, the amount, for instance, the amount of lessons they're allowed to take, or the education that they provide, this education would kill these bankers they're talking about, they would actually kill these universities. It will have, for instance, a person was very problematic that non-profit colleges spend too much on research, leading to the one have several problems with it. Two main answers for it. First of all, we clearly see that it is far better to spend on research than to spend on advertising. And as a second answer, we see clear how this is an indicator of the reputability of some of universities, of these community colleges, that is not exist in that part of the world. Now, we have also talked about online courses and flexibility. Well, we clearly see that these are not colleges actually, they're just online courses, they did not run the college degree, so that's not just very much. Second part of condition for today. Too bad or true. If I told us why don't ban advertising is negative, three main answers for it. We see that this is already regulated, and that this university is finding ways to exploit loopholes and operate on the margins of the law legislation. And a second answer is how they rely on the fucking market techniques for enrollment, and if we were to regulate this, they wouldn't be in a rule that will basically. And a third answer, they're basically conceding. They're fraudulent and taking advantage of minority groups. Why do you disagree?
Well, your speakers at least conceded that these regulations work when they said hundreds of institutions were shut down, but the fact that some institutions still are alive show that they can hear it.
Simply true. On a first answer, this is with the cost of losing these potential benefits that are not only materialized in the return funds, but this is the measurement that we're willing to take to protect the most students that we possibly can in society. And the second answer, ladies and gentlemen, you only see how these regulations they are proposing are so harsh that they're basically the thing of the land. You're just giving them a different name, but I will go on to the repetition later on in the speech. They talk about how regulations work in the nation. Three main answers. First of all, they have presented the legal analysis on how it works. They have not addressed the problem of student loans in Malaysia, presented in the speech. And the second answer, they basically presented two terrific examples and completely ignored the large majority of cases which regulations have failed to actually report. And as an answer, again, see how it is better to use it than to continue having these universities bring their society. Now, what are the main points on this debate? What if we should regulate or ban universities? We've got 5 answers for it. Firstly, we see that these regulations have been tried and failed in the past. They have failed in the United States. They have failed in a variety of countries. We do not want to continue failing. We do not want to continue imposing things in order to not succeed. But after that, so the essence of proper universities lies in the lack of regulation that
next and bad education, the status quo continues on a second case scenario. School interrogations are harsh. In universities, actually close down because you cannot operate at all because you're basically based on fraud and deception. On a third answer, this will be the only successful way, even if we correlate all of the problems for workers have, the only successful way to start the judgment would be to regulate the reinvestment that they have in education. If we were to do this latest movement, these universities would basically turn into non-for-profits. Therefore, the fifth answer, so the most practical thing, the thing that consumes the left resources and time is to bundle into sports assessment. Third point, the vulnerable. The tool is focused on sports countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we have brought you a variety of countries in which public universities are inherently negative and inherently harmful to students. We have brought examples of Chile, Malaysia, Peru. We have brought examples of all over the world which they have not intended. Second answer, even if this was the case, considering the less governmental developed countries, public universities are actually worse for the students. Why? Because they're even more vulnerable and because they're susceptible to acquiring private loans which have even higher their ability to even higher interest fees. They told us that students are able to make decisions and are able to surround themselves. 3 minutes of school. We told you that universities are so bad that in many cases they do not even appear in the records. Therefore, they become students. They have not practiced. Second answer, even if this works in the case, we do not have infinite choice. The sixth really is to limit your choice in order to protect. And the third one, so this choice is not actually naturalized because of the substantive techniques that these universities are with all. We also talk about minorities. On our first point, we saw these universities do not hear about minorities and are just enrolling them so they can get a federal aid which comes with minorities growth. But we also see these minorities are not even graduates. They are having low job prospects and therefore not being able to pay their schools. They are being left with low salaries. These minorities are not being paid at all. They are being left in a worse situation than they initially were. The 2000 universities still a niche in the education community and some colleges are wrong. 2 answers. Community colleges stand for this niche, and secondly, that they are not providing any education at all. They told us that minorities drop out because of profit. So we notice how they are not helping students and how they are blaming minorities for their harms in these universities. Therefore, it's for universities to sort of and not for sure.
So, just two positions because back 8 minutes and 9 minutes.
And now to continue the case for the opposition, please welcome Mr. Abhishek Kumar.
Single mothers, crippled veterans, and working adults. For these people, the only educational opportunity they have are for-profit universities, and what side proposition doesn't realize that when you ban them, you're going to leave them high and dry. The only thing we heard in their model is that we're going to turn for-profit universities into non-profit universities. They don't really engage with all our arguments about how intrinsically for-profit universities are what makes them beneficial, the flexibility, the type of education that it gives. Just turning them into non-profits will not solve the problem, meaning that these people will have no place to go, no place to find the education that they want, and will simply be entrenched in inequality that opposition simply does not support. In this speech, I have 2 issues for you. First of all, whether it is a legitimate choice or not for individuals to partake in for-profit universities, and second of all, whether the outcome is beneficial or not, where you have the better quality of education. So first of all, on this idea of whether it is a legitimate choice or not, the only thing we heard from side proposition is how there's an information asymmetry, saying that sometimes these colleges would not be in rankings, and they said that the University of Phoenix apparently isn't in rankings. Well, first of all, obviously an online University of Phoenix won't be in the national rankings of physical colleges. They have their own rankings for themselves. They have own rankings for online universities. But even if we can see their best case scenario, how there are no rankings, ladies and gentlemen, let's not be patronizing to the students. People can do their own Google searches. They can use the internet. There exists a lot of information online. It's not simply like they got force blinkers on and only the advertising that they see is the only thing they can gain. That doesn't really make sense. No, thank you. Then they said that all the money will be spent on recruiters in the first argument about it will be spent on Navy SEAL ads and fear-mongering campaigns. They never showed you why this money spent on recruiters or the Navy SEAL ads or fear-mongering campaigns cannot simply be regulated. They haven't fulfilled the burden why that regulation won't work. All you need to do is say you can't spend above an X amount of money on advertising or take down any advertising campaigns that are infringing on the rights. No, thank you. And so they don't really understand that or prove why the regulation doesn't occur. This is where we told you in our first case why it's actually a legitimate choice because the information asymmetry doesn't exist. We told you 4 layers of analysis. Having access to information on the most basic level in the internet. And second of all, the cost burden. They didn't engage with this. If I'm spending so much money, thousands of dollars, I have every reason to find every question and ask every person I know about these for-profit universities and find out. I will not be in the blind and just leave it to fate and pray to God that I won't join a university that's not good. Then the first speaker told you about how even if they have all these arguments about dropout rates and that reason making it an uninformed choice, we told you how ethnic groups also have high dropout rates in community colleges and non-profit universities. That does not make it a legitimate choice. And lastly, if the goal is expanding opportunities, you simply cannot get it without a degree and something that you can exclusively get with for-profit universities. Then, what did they tell you? They said the regulations will close them down because what helps them stay afloat and will these deceptive campaigns. I don't really see why preying on people's vulnerabilities and their emotions is what keeps them afloat. They have companies supporting them, they have a bankroll. It doesn't really see why their bankroll turns off or the bank account closes if these ads disappear. That doesn't really make sense. This whole rhetoric about the regulation being so crippling, there's no logic coming from side proposition why this is so true. They need to engage with our examples in the rest of the world. Manipal University, University of Technology Petronas, in which these regulations didn't cripple them. We need to think about the regulations working, not just the worst case scenario, because we can't just say in the worst case scenario they don't work, we ban them. We have to think about the possibility of them working, because the truth is they are possible to work. We can give you many examples of them working, we can't simply ban them. Then this misrepresentation of our case saying that removing of the flexibility is going to hinder them from actually staying afloat. What we tell you is this is a misrepresentation. The regulations are not going to simply prevent them from staying afloat because they are made by the state, which is going to think about them and have considerations for them because they realize that the single mothers and crippled veterans need these universities. So they simply can't do absurd policies that really hurt these people. That doesn't really make sense. But before I go on, sure.
All you're trying to do is fit the for-profit colleges into the mold of non-profit. Wouldn't it be better to just turn it into non-profits?
We are not exactly doing that. Non-profits are distinctly unique from for-profit universities. They don't have the flexibility, they don't have the educational opportunities that for-profits provide. If you really engage with the case from the first and second speaker, you would see this. And because you have not, you're not able to see. We can't simply push these people from for-profit universities into non-profit universities. These benefits simply cannot exist. So thank you. Then, this idea of how, this idea of failing education, the second issue of the outcomes and the quality of education. They said they're going to maximize profit, they're going to focus on the short-term gains, not going to pay attention to students. This is where our really second argument comes into place. So we told you in our side opposition, we told you how we really don't have that because the market incentive is really self-corrective and actually have reason to correct itself. Their only argument about is the conflict of interest. They claim that, companies want to earn money, people want to learn, and that's the clash, and that people are going to not get the education that they want. That doesn't really make sense to me because if the company wants to earn money, and the education is what the people want, and they can only get the money by having the people studying at their school, they need to give good education. So the conflict of interest doesn't really make sense. So thank you. In our case, we told you how they are going to make money by increasing revenue, so they can't really abandon these people and make the for-profit universities so bad because the revenue won't exist. We also told you about the heavy competition that exists. They didn't really engage with that, how if one university is bad in their world, in Peru and other examples, there may be other universities. If not in Peru, they can go abroad. That doesn't really make sense why the competition doesn't exist on their side. Lastly, on this idea of job outcomes, we can tell you that when these for-profit universities build partnerships, Petronas, with UT, Manipal universities with many medical colleges in India, they're not going to leave their for-profit students without a job, without outcomes. That doesn't really make sense, no thank. The only thing we heard about an analysis for this from side opposition is that, the statistics, 22% get hired, the dropout rates, and all that about that. Let me deal with this right now. They haven't shown you why dropout rates, no thank you, are a legitimate metric of failure of for-profit universities. No thank you. We tell you the dropout rates are so high, this is perfectly fine, because we have an explanation. In for-profit universities, flexibility is key, and if you think that they can't keep up with this flexibility, if it's too much for them, they drop out. We don't think it is so bad. We don't think it is the point where we're going to ban them. You can see that if they find value in it, even if they drop out, that is perfectly fine. And we can also tell you that in other universities, in non-profit universities, and other community colleges, and for ethnic groups, the dropout rates are equally high. So until they prove that they have to ban those as well, their argument doesn't really stand. Then this idea about debt, let me give you 3 responses. First of all, the debt, the numbers we heard from there are $1 million. I don't think for-profit universities have $1 million, so just throwing numbers around. Then they said $70,000. That's higher than any for-profit university in America. That's clear. Then they said that debt is so harmful and so dangerous. Let me tell you, debt is a legitimate risk that people take. Just because debt exists, we can't just stop for-profit universities. It is a calculated risk that they take. That is where informed choice and informed consent exists. Lastly, the unique contribution is that for-profit universities have the flexibility to work, meaning you can pay off the debt because you have a job at the same time. Something you can't get in community colleges, something you can't get in non-profits. So that is really the value of for-profit universities. Then, they said that advertising is so bad, deceptive marketing, and all that in the regulation has not worked. Well, if you want examples of regulation working, you can see America and all these other countries evolving. We saw the Student Aid Enforcement Unit and other bodies developing to make sure that these bodies, these for-profit universities, are properly working. But because we want these people to have a proper source of education and not be left high and dry, not be deprived of the very opportunities that removes them from the entrenching of equality, we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
So the third opposition speaker spanned 8 minutes and 21 seconds.
I thank the third opposition speaker for their speech. We now move to the team's 4 minute concluding remarks each. To deliver the opposition's remarks each, I call upon Mr. Ignacio Flores.
Ladies and gentlemen, recognize that this debate, the proposition cannot come here naming a few bad for-profit colleges and saying that they're all bad and therefore they should ban all of them. They have to prove inherent characteristics of for-profit incentives to make it inherently bad and harmful to individuals. This is why this debate can boil down to 2 questions. First, are they inherently harmful, and secondly, can individuals make an informed choice to allow them to make a choice? First, are they inherently harmful? Note that all the harms provided by Team Argentina was either 1, possibly to be regulated, 2, not inherent for-profit colleges, or 3, just not to inside. But first, on completely regulated. They talk about they will have poor standards, no teachers, and poor standards curriculum. So you can regulate that in instances when colleges don't have the standards and you can punish them for it. But second, they talk about problems like debt, dropout, which we've engaged with already coming from the entire batch of opposition we said. First, they're not inherently for-profit, they also exist in non-profit. But secondly, for-profit education allows us to deal with these harms as well. But lastly, they said that they provide inherently bad education, which is a conflict of interest. We told you why this conflict of interest is a lie. They do have a same interest to make sure students are successful because that's how we're able to get more students applied in their colleges in the future. But secondly, they said, but you spend only on advertising. We told you why you spend this portion on advertising. Other nonprofits also have spending on other things that are not relevant to students, like research, for instance. So the amount of spending we have on students is balanced. What this is all about? This means that all the harms that they try to provide are really inherent or necessarily harmful to for-profits and that's why we don't think that they're able to prove an inherent and compelling harm to this ruling system. But we went beyond saying that these harms are not inherent in for-profits, and we told you a lot of times, for-profits are for force for good. We told you that if you're a veteran, for instance, if you're a single mother, if you're a member of a minority, this is the only form of education that you're able to get on engagement service. We have no response coming from them. How they'll be in a better position when you don't have these college degrees allowed to get a job interview to begin with. For them to lift themselves to accept education to provide for it. But secondly, we told you a lot of times, for-profit colleges are good colleges with good qualities of education. We told you reasons for this. One, that they have connections to businesses. The University of Petronas, for instance, connection to the Petronas company in Malaysia. Or niche courses, which gives you technical vocational skills, allow you to be able to get courses that are in demand. With things like higher capital, in places like the developing world, where you don't have capital for education, and you need multinational corporations like Manipal in India to fill that gap of education. All of these benefits heard no response from the entire bench coming from proposition. So we've been able to prove to you, therefore, that there's an exclusive benefit to these universities, and it's unjust to take it away by banning them altogether. So we've proven to you why there's no inherent harm and what they're actually forced. But second, even if there's some harms to these individuals, and sometimes you fail because you're part of college, like you take part in for-profit college, we prove to you why individuals can make an informed choice and why you should allow them to make an informed choice. All these said was, advertising is deceptive, and people can't know about these things. We gave you so many reasons as to why individuals can make an informed decision. And even if advertising is deceptive, you can regulate that, but there are other forms of ways to get information. You can Google rankings, for instance, you can Google servers. You can also, ladies and gentlemen, know that because you have to make a really big financial decision, you have an inherent interest to research and know as much about the college you're enrolling in. Given that then, I think it's reasonable to assume that these individuals make an informed decision knowing what the possible outcomes and the possible risks they take when they enter into for-profit universities. Why is this important? Because just because sometimes you are unsuccessful doesn't justify why individuals should be bad. We gave the example of poor people taking loans instead of businesses, you heard no response from opposition. Given that then why for-profits are not bad, or very good, and why individuals can make a choice, we're very proud of these.
So the presentation of your opposition speakers spanned 4 minutes and 16 seconds.
And now, to conclude the day's special conversation and the day as a whole, I call upon Mr. Francisco
Team opposition wants to help minorities and vulnerable students. Yet they propose sending them to the most capitalistic and abusive institutions in the education industry. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot buy your way out of poverty. Our biparty advice leading to 3 main questions. The first, are for-profit colleges abusing students? The second, are these colleges incompatible with regulation? And the third, are these colleges counterproductive for students? Beginning with the first question, are for-profit colleges abusing students? Team opposition told you that these colleges are helping vulnerable students in developing countries especially. We told you that they are not helping them whatsoever. Actually, they don't care about them. All they do is they abuse them so they can take away more profits. We told you that they abuse these vulnerable people and only take away their money. They lure them in with deceptive marketing. Then they try to make them think that they will get a good education, but they actually get nothing except a lot of debt and a useless degree if they get it. And they don't appear in these rankings that they talk about. The information is not available. Why is it not available? Because these colleges make their objective not to make it not available. These colleges do not appear on rankings. Students have no information going in because of the huge disparity of information between the student and the colleges. And we talked about the University of Phoenix, which we said does not appear, which is the biggest university, for-profit university in the United States, and does not appear in any rankings. It is actually a physical university. It's not a non-academic course whatsoever. It's a physical college, and does not appear just like the great majority of these colleges. We told you that in developing countries, the situation is far worse. Why? Because the debt that these colleges are making their students incur is even more destructive. Why? Because we have the private loans, because of a lack of loan programs, which have increasing incredibly high interest rates, and make it impossible for these students to pay. We can use examples of Peru and Malaysia. These are the colleges are causing huge problems. So are for-profit colleges abusing students? Yes, absolutely they are. And the second question, are these colleges incompatible with regulations? All of the opposition's case is based upon the premise that we should regulate and not ban. We told you that you cannot regulate. The United States has tried countless times since the 80s with no success whatsoever. And harsh regulations, extreme regulations, have the effect of closing these colleges down and take away all of their flexibility and all of the supposed benefits that they talked about. You can't fit for-profit into the mold of a non-profit. We have the example of Obama regulation, which closed down the vast majority of these colleges in the country. And the incredibly few that survive are finding loopholes once again avoiding these regulations, just like they did throughout the United States history. And a ban is actually a more effective technique. Why? Because first of all, it is much easier to impose, and secondly, it requires much less resources. Therefore, those resources can go to public education colleges of high quality. So are these colleges compatible with regulation? Yes, they are. Third and final question. Are these colleges coming for students? The opposition told you that these colleges are giving useful degrees that help their students. We told you that is not the case, that is false. In 78% of these colleges, the average student has worse job prospects than a high school dropout because the employers are running away from these degrees because they're completely useless and people are going in uncorrected for their career. And actually, that is if they get a degree, because in the great majority of cases they drop out. They told you that this is not a problem because we don't care if they drop out, that is their choice. We told you that yes, it is a huge problem when you're dropping out after incurring into huge debt and you're undermining your career in the future. These four colleges have a 9 times higher rate of student loan defaults than their non-profit counterparts. And this is much worse than even when they started and had no degree at all. So are these colleges counterproductive for students? Yes, they are. So because we have proven all our purpose from this debate, we believe the universities should serve their students first, not their shareholders. Thank you.